Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I am thrilled to be here moderating this panel and want to say welcome to all our panelists. I'm going to briefly introduce them. But before I do, I should mention that was the world premiere of The Girl Effect, The Clock is Ticking, which I think you'll agree was extraordinarily moving and effective and is the perfect setup for our discussion today. I'm, as is Secretary Clinton's speech about the commitment to provide simple, clean burning cook stoves to women and families in the developing world. Her Majesty, Queen Rania Al Abdullah, Queen of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, as we heard. Where do I begin? Rania has been a passionate and eloquent advocate for global education through her work at the UN, as well as One Goal, which she co-founded along with the 2010 World Cup and the Global Campaign for Education. Her life's work will culminate in the establishment of the Queen Rania Foundation that will be launched early next year. And rather than my describing some of the goals of that foundation, we'll be hearing from Rania about that, Her Majesty, momentarily. She is also the queen of new media. I'm very jealous because she has 1.3 million followers on Twitter. And just to mix it up a bit, I thought I'd add a little color. One of the people she most admires is King Hussein. She really enjoyed the book she recently read called Little Bee, and her favorite food is anything in a sandwich. I tried to add a little life to the food choices, but I have to be honest with you, they're all very boring. Muhtar Kent is the chairman and CEO of a little company called Coca-Cola. He's actually been with Coca-Cola for more than 3 decades, running operations in Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and elsewhere, but one of his greatest achievements has been working within his company to attract and promote women. He'll tell you more about that himself momentarily, but part of that work involves thousands of female entrepreneurs worldwide who distribute Coca-Cola beverages. I think he's a great person to talk to about the role of corporations in furthering social change. He most admires John F. Kennedy. His favorite book, Tom Friedman will be very happy to hear this, is The World is Flat. And his favorite food is fresh fish. What did I tell you? President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf became Liberia's first elected female president in November of 2005, as well as the first elected female leader of the continent. By virtue of her position, she has served as a powerful and inspiring role model of unlocking the potential of women. Her life's work has focused on ridding her country of corruption and reviving hope following years of civil war. Now, before she ran for president, she told Newsweek, "I'm most concerned with being a mother to Liberia. I want to heal the deep wounds of this nation." And in the last 5 years, she's made amazing progress. There aren't many other political leaders who would qualify as she did for inclusion in a recent New York Times Magazine issue called Saving the World's Women. President Sirleaf most admires Julius Nyerere and Nelson Mandela. It's a tie. Her favorite book is The Bottom Billion by Paul Collier, and her favorite food is rice. So, welcome. Nice to see you all. So we just saw in that video the staggering statistics, and clearly, Your Majesty, there are so many obstacles that are preventing girls and women from unleashing their talent, their intelligence, their potential. What do you see as some of the biggest obstacles worldwide?
Well, I think we all know what the major obstacles are. They range from poverty to gender bias, old, backward traditional mindsets. Poverty is one of the main ones. But I think we need to tackle each one of those individually and with force. But also, we need to look at the more pragmatic side. So when we think of a woman who's not employed, we tend to think that she's sitting idle, just staring at the sky, doing nothing. But from my experience in visiting villages and impoverished areas all over the world, these women who are unemployed are actually working hard every day, all day. They're doing jobs like taking care of the house, taking care of the kids, cooking, all those things. Now, there are certain things we take for granted. For example, in the developed world, if we want water, you just turn on a tap. But in the developing world, sometimes it takes up to 4 hours a day for a woman to go and fetch water. In sub-Saharan Africa, that amounts to 40 billion hours a year, which is a year's labor for the entire workforce of France. So when we look at these women, they are working very hard, but their time is not being used efficiently at all. The supply chain for them is underdeveloped because there's not enough plumbing, there's not enough electricity, there aren't enough roads for women. So these women are working hard, but their time is not efficient. What needs to happen is for us to free women's time so they can move up the value chain. So they're not stuck just doing menial jobs. They're important jobs, but they're not what women could be contributing. And ironically, it's other women who are best positioned to free up these women's time. So if we looked at the matrix of what a woman does in a day, and we conducted a value analysis of her time, we can see that there are certain inefficient links that we can remove from the supply chain. So when we go to villages, for example, we know that a woman is famous for making great food. If that woman starts a business and starts to provide homemade meals to other women in the village, then women can free up their time to go and take a government position. And therefore, both women are benefiting and moving up the value chain. So this is a more kind of pragmatic approach to look at things, because I noticed that in Jordan, for example, we dealt with the education issue. We have gender parity. We have more female graduates than we have male. But in the workforce, women are still underrepresented. And it's a combination of mindsets that think that marriage and family are mutually exclusive, but also it's the fact that there isn't an ecosystem that supports women being in the workplace. And that's something that we have to work on. As governments, we need to provide the services that can help women go into the workplace. Also, private sector, and NGOs, they all have a job and a role to play. And like I said, other women can help women move up the value chain. And I think that's essential.
President Johnson Sirleaf, I know you've been listening to women and working to advance women's rights for many years now. And much of your work has focused on protecting women from violence and helping them with the simple issue of mobility. Can you speak to that for us and how that has prevented women from moving forward?
We focused, first of all, recognizing that our greatest constituency are women, those to whom we owe our electoral vote as women, particularly women in the informal sector. And so we focus on how do we empower them, what do we do for them. Started with the basic fundamental of addressing girls' education by making primary education compulsory and free. But that wasn't enough, and so improving the conditions of women in the informal sector, market women, giving them literacy training, better conditions of work. And what that has done is given them some upward mobility, because once they begin to work under different conditions and had a bit of literacy where they could understand the basic tenets of business, then they wanted to do trade. And so we moved them into cross-border trade. Women go across the borders to be able to fetch marketable goods and to bring them back. And so enabling them to do that, move them up to a different level. And we also recognize that the majority of our women are also farmers. And so what do we do about making sure that we reach back in a linkage way to say, let's help women farmers to be able to produce the foods rather than going across the border to be able to fetch them, where sometimes they face obstacles, serious obstacles in transport, in custom guards, and infringement on their rights. And so we got World Food Program to be able to buy their produce. But all that said, violence in the society remains a big issue. Rape continues to be a problem for us, coming from the effects of many years of conflict, gender-based violence, domestic violence. And so what we did was, first of all, we have a tough rape law in which rape is a non-bailable crime. There's still challenges to that by our lawyers, who thinks it's an infringement on rights, but it's something we're going to maintain. We established a special court to be able to deal with domestic violence, violence against women, a special unit in the Ministry of Justice. And so all of those are our responses to that, although those problems still continue, but been a lot of progress made. And I think this has given women much more freedom and enabled them to have much more overcoming the obstacles of lack of access to the factors of production, access to justice, access to equal opportunity. So this has had some beneficial effect, but we still have challenges in that regard.
I'd love to talk to you both about changing cultural mindsets, but before we do that, I want to ask Mr. Kent about sort of his enlightened view of women in the workforce. Did you have an epiphany at some point that made you realize this is a great and sometimes untapped resource for you in a business situation?
Thank you, Katie. First, what a privilege it is to share a panel with a queen and a president. It's the first time for me. Look, it was really simple. When I became the president of our company and chief operating officer 3.5 years ago, I just looked at who were buying our products. 70% of the shoppers in the world globally who were buying our products were women. Then I looked at our workforce. I looked at our senior team, middle management, new recruits coming into the company. I looked at our bottling partners around the world. And there was a huge mismatch, Very low numbers in senior management, ditto, every level. So it was a no-brainer. We said, we've got to change this. We're not tapping into the resources in the world properly. We have a mismatch, and the future and the picture of success is not what we have. So then we looked at barriers. Why was that? One of the issues that came up was very rigid processes. Mobility was a big issue because we're a very international company. We serve 206 countries around the world and millions of communities. So I went about first setting up what we call a Women's Leadership Council 3.5 years ago, with the object, and it has 16 members, rotates every 2 years, the best examples in our company, in our bottling partners that are women leaders, with the objective of recruiting, with the objective of motivating, developing, and retaining women leadership. And we have got a lot better. In recent times, we have appointed a woman leader who's our controller, global controller. We've got the head of our European business, one of 5 business units that make up the Coca-Cola company, a French lady who runs our European business, is a lady. We've got the head of our global quality assurance, which is critical to us, is Carlotta Uten, who's a woman leader in our company. We got our chief people officer, recently appointed, again, a woman leader, and many other levels. One of our top 3 leaders in China is Madame Luan, who's, again, been there for not too long a period of time. So this is a journey. It's a journey. We know it's a journey. We know that we've got a long way to go, but the numbers are getting better at every level. And I think that partly what we are doing also in some of our projects to promote empowerment and promote entrepreneurial projects that have women leadership in them are again part of what to make sure that we eradicate this mismatch that we have, that we identified. But it's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, but we are making good progress.
I know you were saying, President Johnson Sirleaf, about the market women who were largely responsible for your election. Can you describe this population and how you've been able to bring them up and how you hope to integrate them with the greater economic picture in Liberia?
We started to improve the conditions under which they work. If you look at some of the film that was just playing, you saw the women with their goods on the ground, just on a piece of cloth. And so it's how do we build better markets for them? In the markets, many of them take their children in the marketplace, the ones that are too young for school. So our new modern buildings make sure that we have daycare. We have a daycare and primary schools whereby their kids can go to school in there and make sure that we have basic sanitation facilities and water. And try to take that not just in the urban areas, but as much as possible to be able to take it into some of the rural areas. But even that was not enough because many times they didn't understand how to do the business. You know, how do they calculate their profit? How do they know when they go across to buy the goods, how much they can sell it for and whatnot? Many of them couldn't read, so we introduced for market women literacy training programs. And many of these were supported by some of the people in this room. This wasn't, government didn't have enough money to do this, so we actually went out and tried to mobilize private money, private donations from individuals, from foundations, from institutions to be able to do this. Today, many of the women, you know, aspire to just be able in the next election not to have to use the thumbprint, but to be able to read what's on the ballot and to be able to check their choice of candidate. So that has just empowered them in such a way and giving them a voice in decision-making at their levels, whereby they felt sufficiently strong, sufficiently independent, that they could stand up, say, in a meeting, a community meeting, and they could speak their minds and they could talk about what their rights were. I mean, those are what have made a big difference in their empowerment. They're not the big things. I mean, our educational program is long-term in getting the effect, but being able to make a difference in their lives right away, I mean, touching them in the things they do day to day. And it's still a big challenge for us, but I can see that the transformation that comes when, you know, when someone, a market woman says to me, you know, there was a time when conditions were so tough that I just used to pray for God to take me, for me to die quickly. Now I just want to live long so I can be what I want to be. So that's the kind of transformation that to us, you know, makes a big difference.
Sometimes it seems to me that societal changes lag behind institutional changes. So you can ensure that girls are educated or they have opportunities. But what I mentioned earlier about the cultural mindset and traditions that really sort of permeate every aspect of life, how do you work towards shaping those? Because they can be very oppressive for girls and women everywhere.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the most frustrating things I find in my work, you know, is that like I said, in Jordan, we've achieved great levels of education for women, but when I look at the number of women in the workplace, it's very shameful how low it is. And, you know, I always find it so patronizing, you know, when you can debate anything with policymakers and they're willing to have an open debate. When it comes to women, it's an underlying, entrenched, almost chauvinism that exists, that they don't say it openly, you know, but it's there, you know, it exists. And we need to confront it because we have decades of evidence that show that no country can make any progress in spite of its women. They make it with the full participation of women. So they need to be injected in the supply chain of the world. If you look at the past 20 years, women have contributed more to global GDP than new technologies or the emerging markets of India and China. Now that's staggering. Women who work inject 90% of their earnings back into the family to spend on education of their children or on their health. So when you educate a woman, you really do lift societies. You transform societies. And when we're looking at our world today with all the financial problems, if I were a leader, you know, I would prioritize investing in women. It's not about huge infrastructure projects or stimulus package. Unleash the potential of women, and that's how you're going to stimulate your economy. It's as simple as that. It's important for people. It's really important for makers to finally put women front and center of public policy and to confront their own gender biases or insecurities towards having women participate in the workplace.
How important a role is educating boys, in your view?
Education is the most powerful tool that we can give our children, and it's the best gift that we can give them to secure a better future. But there are sources, I mean, I see in Jordan how even attitudes towards, social attitudes can even harm boys just as much as girls. So for example, it's okay for girls to go to school, but as I said earlier, when it comes to getting married, then you have to quit your job. But for boys, we find that at the age of 12 or 13, if the family needs money, they'll get the boy go out into the workplace. So what we find is that when the girl graduates, she gets married, so she's not reaping the benefits of her education. The boy is not educated, so that pulls the family down. So education for boys and girls is essential as a starting point. But it's not the only thing that we have to do. We have to provide the whole ecosystem that ensures that the skill sets are matched to the market needs and that they are actually getting jobs moving forward.
Speaking of that, Mr. Ken, I know that you've worked on something called micro-distribution in Africa, where you're encouraging entrepreneurship among impoverished Africans, but also many women. Tell us about that program and how it can be possibly duplicated in other parts of the world.
Actually, it emanated partly, at least the women entrepreneurial project side emanated at the Clinton Global Initiative last year, when I made a commitment that we would create another 1,500 of these entrepreneurial projects across many nations in Africa, East Africa mainly, Uganda, Tanzania, Mozambique, Kenya, etc. And I said at that time that 50% of the entrepreneurs that we would be creating, new entrepreneurs last year, would be women. And I'm glad to say here that we've passed that target of 50% in 7 African nations. And they now employ, those entrepreneurs that have come into being, employ an additional 8,000 people across the continent of Africa, for a total of over 20,000 people through these micro-distribution centers. And that again came out of a very fundamental, simple belief that women empowerment is critical to sustainable communities. And unless we play a meaningful role in creating sustainable communities where we serve our consumers, then we will not have a sustainable business. So that whole project came out of how do we bring down barriers to women entrepreneurs, particularly, and those barriers were things like access to finance, access to technology, access to land, and so forth. And we went about creating these, bring those barriers down, and creating these micro-distribution centers, very successful. And actually, I'm very pleased to say that we have decided to take that model and to the rest of the world, to Asia, to Latin America, from Africa, which, again, not many examples of best practice being taken from the continent. And this is one where we clearly are very excited with the prospects of taking those micro-distribution centers. And what they are essentially is the end of our capillaries in our supply chain, where our trucks, because of lack of infrastructure, cannot get to certain places and to serve communities with our beverages, with our products. Then we use these micro-distribution centers, create these entrepreneurial projects. And we have so many examples. I visited this year, when I went in June and July to Africa, some examples where, again, these are flourishing women entrepreneurs. I went to see some in South Africa, see some in Kenya. It was fantastic to see all of it flourishing. And I therefore want to sit here and say in front of this distinguished audience that we are going to make a commitment as the Coca-Cola system. I'm challenging our entire system, our bottling partners across the world, all our people across the world, that in the next decade, we're going to create empowerment for 5 million additional women by 2020. So 5 in 2020 is the challenge. And we believe it can be done. We certainly believe it can be done. It's going to be a global effort, and it will involve not just the distribution side of our business, it will involve the retailing side of our business. We have, in places like India that are very successful, these mobile retail schools. So we have these big tractor trailers that go around villages, towns, and teach the basics of retailing. And in many cases, again, they are women entrepreneurs that come and learn the basics of retailing, stock rotation, basic accounting, merchandising, all the techniques. And it's very interesting, some of the symbiotic relationships that enable us to do that. I'll just give you one example of that. In India, for example, women carry water, clean water, from miles to their villages. And that is a basic need for them, for their families to survive. We, through our water harvesting projects, bring clean water to those towns and villages. Emancipates the women. The women then come and attend some of our retailing training schools and open up small retailing businesses that flourish in those towns and villages. So again, everything connects, and that's why we are excited with this new challenge and initiative, and I'm looking forward to reporting on it in coming years.
Do these women have an opportunity to rise up in the Coca-Cola food chain, if you will, to get promoted, to have opportunities that might be beyond their initial ones?
Well, they first become leading citizens in their communities. So again, the example that I will give you that I visited personally in South Africa, Lali Matabulo, a lady who, through this project, we brought in the basic training, we brought in some merchandising material into her store. Her revenues grew from 5 to 50 over a short period of time. She is now opening up new retailing units in various townships, not just around Johannesburg, but even some other townships in close by. So and then she's employing 16 people now, and she is going to probably be employing many more in the years to come. So that's the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that comes and flourishes when you actually can support it and when you can break down the barriers that prevent it from happening in the first place.
President Johnson Sirleaf, clearly we hear about the ripple effect, and this does affect every issue is sort of connected to the other. What do you see as the most critical first step to having progress or to making progress in this area? Is it education? Is it safety? Is it economic opportunity? What will lead us down the right road in your view?
Before I say, let me just say to him that you've got a bottling plant in Liberia, so I'm going to make sure Liberia gets his fair share of that.
This is what you call networking in a very high-profile way.
You know, for us, coming from where we've come from, we started with the first step of education. And education is not necessarily formal education, but just access to knowledge. If it's for girls, it could be in schools and academia. If it's for women, it could well be just going through some of the literacy training to equip them properly. We've got a great program supported that came out of the Clinton Initiative a couple of years ago, in which we wanted to do something about adolescent girls. And in that program, that's supported by the World Bank, by Nike Foundation, by the Novo Foundation, what it seeks to do is to train the adolescent girls in particular skills, but particular skills for which there's a demand by the private sector for most of our major concessions that are opening up. And so they'll train them to go into particular jobs. Those are the kinds of, short-term things that form part of first steps, so that you don't have to just stick with one thing, but you can do several things that achieve the objective.
We have some questions actually from a worldwide audience via Twitter, Miss Twitter. And first of all, though, we have one from YouTube that I think we're going to roll that question and see who feels comfortable answering it.
What role do nonprofits and private corporations have in improving women farmers' access to things such as seeds, fertilizer, and market information?
Who would like to take that? Women farmers, how can we give them better access?
Well, actually, we have a project that we started in 2 African nations, in both Uganda and Kenya, with the Gates Foundation, to create entrepreneurship for 50,000 new farmers. We had a need for some juice concentrates to for our products in not just in those 2 markets, but across the whole continent of Africa. And there was a lack of supply, and we have been working now with with farmers for providing the right conditions, the right techniques, the right irrigation. And what we found is, again, that only 1% in those countries of land ownership was women owners. Only 1%. So what a huge barrier. So we found we are finding ways and means to ensure that women can be a very meaningful part of this new project that we have embarked upon with the Gates Foundation to create empowerment for 50,000 new farmers. We will take the produce from those farmers and use it in our supply chain across Africa, in not just producing ordinary juices, but also nutrient added juices for children across the continent of Africa.
Which is critically important considering that rural women produce 55% of all food grown in developing countries. So obviously they have a lot of power and influence, but it's not being realized. A question for Your Majesty. What is this? This is from Rahim, a Harvard Hauser Center for Nonprofits. What is the single biggest challenge facing girls and women regarding educational access in the Middle East? And what do you think the most promising solution is? You've had quite a bit of success with this in Jordan.
We have, and I think generally the Middle East and North African region is one of the biggest spenders on education. And like I said, we have in many countries, over like 12 countries in the Middle East, more girls in school than, especially in university, than we have males. So the challenge, yes, in some countries there is some challenge to access, and that has also a lot to do with entrenched mindsets that need to be changed. But I think what's more important, the bigger challenge for us is how to get women into the labor market. That's what we really need to confront. But also, it's about changing mindsets. When you talk about changing mindsets, it's demonstrating what it really means when you say education. I mean, it's not just about educating a woman. You know, it's when you educate a woman, you beat poverty. You know, because like I said, women spend 90% of their earnings back into the family, whereas men spend only 30 to 40%.
Which is such an interesting statistic.
It's a very interesting statistic. You know, it's also a social vaccine. Women who are educated, actually, if you have all children go to primary school, over the next 10 years, you can prevent 7 million cases of HIV/AIDS. Now, that's a staggering statistic. Education is a midwife. When a woman is educated, her chances of dying of maternal mortality levels go down by 10% for every extra year of education. A child is 50% more likely to make it to his 5th birthday if his mother is literate. So it's not just about doing girls a favor, it's about really benefits that cascade throughout society and really make a huge difference. So when people really understand what the value of education is, it's such a compelling argument that it's difficult not to make that a priority for policy makers.
We have another one to President Johnson Sirleaf. How are you thinking about and progressing property and land rights for women in Liberia?
We don't really have any legal restrictions to women's right to land, to property, to inheritance in this regard. If there's any constraint, it's just a constraint of attitudes. But, you know, women are working the land, and women are much more conscious and much more dedicated and much more diligent in working the land. All we do for them, which was mentioned before in the question, is to give them the tools and to give them some technical assistance. And if you look all over today, the farms that are being produced by the women. The men, you know, rather just play drums.
Here's a question for you, Mr. Kent, along those lines. What is the best way to effectively channel the positive energy of men who don't just want to play drums to support the empowerment of women and girls?
Well, I think it's a very simple belief that you need to ensure that men also understand that when you empower women successfully, when you are successful with creating a better playing field for women in all communities in the world, that the entire sea rises. When the entire level of the sea goes up, the men benefit too. That's as simple as that.
But
There's nothing to fear.
Do they worry about the competition, though, particularly?
I think competition, if the competition means that the entire level of the sea is going to go up, the men will benefit too. And it's that simple belief.
Okay, this is to the entire panel. Ending violence against women and girls means confronting, we sort of addressed this, but deep-rooted, complex issues. When progress may be difficult, slow, or at times even discouraging, how can we stay motivated and passionate to confront this issue head-on over the long haul?
The issue of...
I think it's ending violence against women and girls, specifically.
We just say to them, we're going to stay the course. If we say rape is not going to be a bailable offense, and the lawyers say that a person is innocent until proven guilty, you've got to go to court before you can do that. We say if you rape a 4-year-old child, we're going to move it from rape to murder and just make it more intense. So I think the biggest thing to stay passionate about it is to stay on the course, to keep sensitizing the public, to introduce in our educational systems the need for the protection of women, the role that women play, and how this contributes to the entire society, and to have those instruments and those laws that will protect women and just continue to make progress.
It really has to be from the political level, political will, and a bottoms-up approach and top-down approach. So, you know, making sure that the discriminatory laws are eliminated, making sure that community leaders and religious leaders are on board, because they're the ones who affect the cultural dial in any country. So they need to be on board. So, and also realizing that these are incremental changes. Sometimes they're generational. If there's no quick fix, there's no solution. It can just be the Western way of doing things can't be everyone's way of doing things. So each country has to look at its own cultural nuances and try to understand them, then try to make the changes. The most important thing is never to sweep problems under the rug. You know, when I started working on the issue of child abuse in Jordan, it was a huge taboo subject, and the first reaction was always denial. We don't have violence, and it's nobody's business to come and tell us how to bring our children up. But then you had to go out and say it is our business, and we are going to talk about it, and it does exist. Same has to happen with violence against women. People are always very quick to dismiss it as just something that happens behind closed doors. It's overcoming cultural taboos and bringing those subjects in the opening and forcing people to confront the reality on the ground. That's when you're going to go. That's when you're going to see some changes.
Katie, one more thing. You'd like more women leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think we have one more Twitter question before I ask you all to specifically tell everyone here and anyone listening what we can do as individuals to help girls and women all across the world. But there was an interesting Twitter question. I don't know if you guys can put it back on the screen, but I have this statistic: 60% of women and girls in developing countries will be married before the age of 18. Clearly, this is a huge problem. I read most girls will have 4 children, many girls in developing nations, before they reach the age of 20. So this question was, with more than 60 million child brides in the world, why do you think the issue of child marriage continues to slip under the radar of governments and large international development organizations?
One of the most shocking statistics that I just found out was that in the developing world, the leading cause of death for adolescent girls between the ages of 15 and 19 is medical complications related to pregnancy.
And one girl dies every 90 seconds, I think they said last night, from complications.
Imagine that. So this is a moral failure on our part not to address this issue. I think it's shameful that it exists. It's shameful that people let it continue. It's very preventable. In Jordan, we just raised the minimum age of marriage to 18, and that's something that has to happen across in all countries and has to be implemented. Sometimes you find that the laws exist, but people are very lenient in the way that they apply them. So it's essential to make sure that you see teenage girls who have 10 years of experience, 4 kids on the way. Already had 4 kids, and have 10 years of work experience. That's just inexcusable. So I really think that it's something that politicians should really prioritize.
Do laws work in this case, in your view? And how big a problem is it in Liberia, these underage or very young child brides, really?
A big problem. Our challenge in this regard is the retention of girls in school. Keeping them, once they get into secondary schools, they leave, and then chances are they are going to become a young bride and a young mother. And that's a program we're trying to focus on. What do we do to keep them in school long enough so that they're not diverted into early marriage?
Our experience on the ground in most emerging markets where this is a bigger issue has been that if we can be successful in creating that what we call the golden triangle of close cooperation, collaboration between government cannot do it alone, legislation will not do it alone, close collaboration between government, civil society, and business to ensure more empowerment, to ensure more investment, to ensure more jobs are created, to ensure a better belief in the future in those communities. Then, and once that is done, you can see huge differences where that is done successfully. And I think, therefore, the solution belongs to that, to more and more successful partnerships between business, civil society, and government to make sure that on the ground there is sufficient amount of investment and belief in the future and empowerment. And with that, there will be a tremendous improvement. We've seen it in cases where it is working in many parts of the world, but it's a long journey, and therefore expectations on this have to be managed carefully also.
And so what is the most important call to action for everyone here, for people who are so outraged by this? I have 2 teenage daughters, and when I see these statistics and think about young girls in these situations around the world, it is just heartbreaking. But other than bring international attention to this issue, what can the average person do to help these girls to come to their aid?
Well, I can tell you what people in this room can do once they go on their break. There's a program that's started by the United Nations Foundation called Girl Up. And what this program is about is trying to harness the skills and the social networks of girls here in the United States to help their peers in developing countries. So it's a campaign by girls for girls, trying to also redefine our definition of peer-to-peer networking and move it from sharing of movies and music to sharing of missions and movements. So this program will give a girl in Missouri the opportunity to help a girl in Malawi buy school supplies, or a girl in Louisiana help a girl in Liberia, also go for a health checkup. And it also redefines our perceptions and stereotypes of teenage girls, from them just being about makeup and music and pink and whatever, to really being made of sterner stuff that can really make a huge change. So if you connect to girlup.org, there's a movement called a high five, and that means that you donate $5 or more to girls in the developing world, and this money will go for school supplies, for health checkups, for clean water. So that's one thing that you can do, and I think that this is a very, very encouraging program, because the way I see it, girls are born with, a sense of opportunity, ambition, a spirit, and it's not fair for it to be a lottery of birth. Who gets to blossom and who doesn't? Who gets to have a future and who doesn't? So this program is about the next generation of American girls, ensuring that their peers in developing countries will become leaders in their own countries. So please check it out. It's a really great program, and I hope that we can get your support on it.
President Johnson Sirleaf, what would you say?
I think being a part of organizations that focus on girls' and women's rights, being an advocate so that one can change some of the attitudes toward girls. If we can get more advocates from all the people in this room working through the specific organizations and institutions, that helps to make it easier for us to carry that message across. So advocacy for us is a great thing.
Do you think, Mr. Kent, you need baby steps? I think it was interesting that you said it's going to take a long time, and we can't have such high expectations that we're inevitably disappointed.
I think there's a lot of fantastic progress, and I think what I would say is that there are numerous organizations around the world, just for the continent of Africa, where people can get involved through foundations, through different projects on the ground that are all trying to ensure families in all those communities that there's a better future. As long as the families are convinced, then those issues related to early marriage and so forth actually have a very quick way of getting resolved. But the families have to believe in the future, and everything that can be done in those communities to ensure there is investment, to ensure there's proper partnerships, private-public, and in the case of businesses like my own, in the last 10 years, we invested $6 billion in the continent of Africa to create sustainable communities and a business. In this decade that we're in, we have earmarked $12 billion. That is going to help to create a better belief in the future of that continent, of that great continent. And that's just one example. And there has to be a very coordinated effort on that triangle that I've mentioned. And with that, I think that we will see tangible, meaningful improvement.
Well, Muhtar Kent and President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, Queen Rania of Jordan, thank you all so much for participating in the panel.